Scientists just found the oldest disease outbreak in human history. It's 5,500 years old. That's 4,000 years before any plague anyone had records of. Older than the pyramids, older than writing. But that's not the surprising part. The surprising part is who it killed. Because for decades, scientists were confident about one thing. Epidemics are the price we pay for civilization. No cities, no farms, no plague. That was the rule. These victims had no cities, no farms, nothing. And the plague tore through them anyway. Here's how that's possible, and it's simpler than you'd think. First, let's cover the theory everyone believed, because it's a good one. A disease outbreak needs a few things to work. The big one is people. Lots of them, close together, staying put. A disease needs new bodies to jump into. So you need a crowd, and crowds come from farming. And farming brings something else, stored grain. Piles of food sitting still, which attracts rats. Rats carry fleas, and fleas carry plague bacteria. Farming also means living with animals: cows, sheep, goats, pigs. So the story made perfect sense. Farming built the conditions for plague, which meant hunter-gatherers should have been safe. They lived in small bands, a few dozen people at most, and they moved constantly, following food. No stored grain, so no rats, so no fleas. On paper, they had none of the ingredients. Then researchers went to Lake Baikal in southeast Siberia. It's one of the most remote places on Earth, freezing and enormous. And there are ancient cemeteries there from hunter-gatherer communities. These people never farmed, they hunted, they fished, they gathered. They lived off the land, and they moved with it. Scientists pulled DNA out of the teeth of the people buried there. Teeth are perfect for this. They seal in traces of what was in your blood. And what they found was Yersinia pestis, plague. The same bacteria behind the Black Death, thousands of years later. And it wasn't one unlucky person who caught something. Roughly 39% of the people tested from those cemeteries had it. Nearly 4 in 10. One researcher called that rate astounding. And it happened twice, 2 separate waves, centuries apart. Some relatives were buried together, in the same grave, which suggests whole families died at nearly the same time. Other relatives were buried separately. They died in the other wave. So this wasn't a rare disease quietly existing. It was an outbreak, a real epidemic in a society that supposedly couldn't have one. So how did they get it? The first answer is what they ate. These people hunted marmots. A marmot is basically a big ground squirrel. Chunky, lives in burrows. Good meat, good fur, easy to catch. A sensible thing to hunt. Here's the problem. Marmots carry plague bacteria. Not sometimes, in the past. Right now, today, they still do. Marmot hunting still causes plague cases in Central Asia in our lifetime. The bacteria lives in wild rodent populations. It always has. It doesn't need us. We're just an accident it stumbles into. And here's the moment it stumbles in. You kill an infected marmot. You skin it. You butcher it. Your hands are in its blood, and you probably have small cuts. That's all it takes. That's the jump from animal to human. Scientists call that a spillover, and it's how most new diseases start. So one hunter gets infected, but that's just one person. One person isn't an epidemic. So what turned it into one? This is the part that breaks the old theory completely. Because plague isn't one disease, it comes in different forms. The famous one is bubonic. That's the flea and rat version. That form needs fleas, which need rats, which need stored food. That's the version that really does need farming in towns. But the Siberian strain wasn't that one. It was pneumonic. It settled in the lungs. And a lung infection spreads a completely different way. It spreads by coughing, straight from one person to another. No fleas needed, no rats needed, no stored grain needed, no city needed. All it needs is two people sitting close enough to breathe the same air. And that describes every hunter-gatherer camp that ever existed. You sleep in a shared shelter. You sit around one fire. You eat together. You care for each other when someone gets sick. And that last one is the cruel part. Looking after someone who is coughing is exactly how you catch it. The thing that made them human made them vulnerable. And there was one more thing working against them. There was an old assumption that these early strains were weak. That ancient plague existed, but wasn't strong enough to kill in numbers. This find kills that idea. These strains were lethal. And the DNA showed something specific about this one. It carried a gene tied to an extreme inflammatory reaction, meaning your own immune system overreacts and does the damage. And that kind of reaction is especially dangerous in children. One of the victims they found was a girl, around 9 or 10 years old, buried 5,500 years ago with the others. So put the whole thing together. We thought epidemics were something we built for ourselves, the trade-off for farms, cities, and comfort. But this outbreak came before all of that. Before farms, before towns, before writing existed to record it. Plague didn't arrive with civilization. It was already waiting. What cities actually did was give it more room to work. More people, packed tighter, so outbreaks got bigger and more frequent. Civilization didn't create the disease, it just turned up the volume. And there's one part of this that hasn't changed at all. Those people got sick from an animal they hunted for food. The thing that fed them was the thing that infected them. They had no way of knowing that. Nobody knew bacteria existed. They were doing everything right, by everything they understood. And that same doorway is still open today. Most new human diseases still start in animals and jump to us. That's not ancient history. That's just how it works. 5,500 years ago, a hunter skinned a squirrel, and his whole community ended up in the ground. We know their story now, because their teeth kept the evidence. 5,000 years of silence, and they finally told us what happened. If you like the stuff nobody explains properly, you're in the right place. Subscribe. We do this every week.